guys, so today I'm going to be showing you how to make these spooky kind of Halloween themed hair scrunchies. So you're going to need some material. So I've got some general craft material, an old scarf, a dress that doesn't fit me anymore, and also an old t-shirt that I just don't wear. You're going to need some thread. It doesn't really matter what colour you choose, but I'll probably be using black, and a needle if you are choosing to do the sewing option of this scrunchie. You will need some elastic, so I've got some plain white elastic here, a safety pin just to help with one of the methods, and then you will also need some scissors because you will be cutting up the material. Now you can choose to do some of these steps using a hot glue gun. I will tell you which steps they are, but I'm going to choose to use a sewing machine just because it will make it slightly quicker and I think it will make it a bit more sturdy, but of course you could hand sew if you did want to. Now I'm going to begin with the spiderweb print t-shirt. I really love this t-shirt, but it is a man's t-shirt and it does come out quite boxy on me. So I do really like the design still, so I thought I would make something of it rather than throw it away. So I'm going to cut off this bit at the bottom just because it's plain black material and I don't really need it. And then I'm pretty much cutting a rectangle from armpit to armpit, so it's just a strip off the front of the t-shirt. So once you've cut that out, you'll have this kind of rectangle. If you fold it in half, you can see how unevenly I cut it. So I'm just cutting off the excess, but it doesn't matter too much if it is just a little bit wonky. Now in length, I'd say that this is around 30 to 40 centimeters long, and then the edges are around 10 centimeters, but when you do fold them in half they're around 5 centimeters. But it doesn't really matter, it does create sort of different effects of scrunchie depending on how big of a strip you do cut. So you want the kind of side that you want to see on the inside of the scrunchie, if that makes any sense. So you want the pattern on the inside. Then if you want to, you could pin along the edge, but because I'm quite an experienced sewer, I've just decided to just freestyle it. But pinning will keep it sort of in place and you won't have to adjust it like you'll see I'll do. So if you set up the sewing machine, if you are choosing to sew it just to a straight line, now you could do this with a hot glue gun if you wanted to, or again hand sew, but you want to sew down the longest edge of this rectangle. So you want to leave the small edges at the top and the bottom unsewn because you will need those to be open later on, but then you just need to sew one long line down there. So of course you could just hot glue down, or as I said you could hand sew down, but I just found the sewing machine is a lot quicker. Now you'll see that I do stop at points just to rearrange the material, which is just to kind of line it up again. And as I said, if you do pin it, it will sort of stop it from moving around. But because I'm quite used to the sewing machine, this isn't too much of a palaver. So then you pull it out, you cut the string, and you can tidy it up afterwards. So you're then left with this kind of inside out sausage, and you need to turn it around the other way, which is why we've left the edges open. So depending on the material you're using, this can be tricky or it can be quite easy. But you just literally, with this one I had to just fiddle with it and pull it around the right way. You could use maybe a pencil or a chopstick just to help it through. You'll see later in this video with some materials it's so easy to do. So you'll be left with this kind of nice sort of sausage with the ends open. So now you're going to need your elastic. You'll also need the safety pin as well, and of course some scissors to cut the elastic. So when measuring the elastic, I found a pretty foolproof way is just to measure around my wrist. This usually gets the perfect size, but of course the smaller the elastic, the smaller the scrunchie, the bigger the elastic, the bigger the scrunchie will be. So you'll see that the elastic is quite a bit shorter than this kind of fabric sausage we've made, and it does mean that the fabric will scrunch up to create that sort of scrunchy effect. So what you're going to need to do is take the safety pin, thread it through the end of the elastic. Now this isn't completely necessary, but it does make the whole process a lot easier because you're able to kind of feed this safety pin through this fabric tunnel, and it will come out the other end a lot easier than if you don't have a definite end to the elastic. So I just kind of feed it onto my thumb, making sure that the elastic coming out sort of the other end doesn't thread all the way through, and you should end up with these 2 bits of elastic coming out each end, and you can see that the scrunchie is taking definite form now. So you can remove the safety pin, and at this point you just literally tie the ends together. So I just tie a regular knot, and I do pull it kind of from each part of the string just to make sure that it is kind of fully knotted, because you don't want this coming undone at a later point. So at this point, if you did want to, you could just tuck the end in and just make sure that it's all really neat and push it in and you'll be done. So you could leave it at that, but of course it could potentially come apart just because the material isn't sewn together. So you could put glue around the inside if, again, you're going for the hot glue gun version, and just stick it down like that, and voila, you have your scrunchie. But I'm going to actually hand sew mine just to kind of finish it off. I am planning to use these scrunchies a lot, and I do want them to last for a while. So I'm just going to use a needle and thread, and this takes around 2 to 3 minutes, so it doesn't take that long. So I'm sewing through the inside part of the fabric first, and then the kind of overlapping piece. And when you pull them together, it does sort of feed one end into the other as such to create a really nice clean join. And then I'm just going to sew all the way around that join, so I'm making sure that it does overlap a bit. And I'm just going to neatly do really simple little stitches all the way around just to kind of join those ones together. Now, I'm not too sure how you could do this with a sewing machine. I think it would be way too tricky, and as I said, it's quite a quick little sort of step to do within this method, and I do think it really finishes it off. And of course, choose a string that sort of matches the colour of material that you are making your scrunchie with. So then just tie a really neat little knot at the end, cut it off, and then you have your scrunchie ready. So I was really pleased with how this one turned out. I think it's a really nice size, and you can see the pattern quite well just because I didn't use too much fabric. Obviously, the longer the fabric, the more kind of scrunched up it's going to be. And also, the kind of thicker it is, the thicker, the wider your scrunchie becomes. But I do really like the size of this one. I think it's a good sort of everyday one, and when it's in your hair you can see the pattern quite well. I don't think it stands out straight away as a spider web, but I still think it looks quite nice. So next up, I'm going to be using this regular craft fabric, and I do actually have this cut off piece, like it's a random scrap I have left over. So this kind of shows how perfect this whole kind of process can be for getting rid of these little bits of scraps of fabric which are really nice. You don't want to throw them away, but you don't quite know what to do with them. So it's pretty much the perfect size. Again, it's around 30 to 40 centimeters long, and it's a little bit wide. I'd say this one's more like 20 centimeters wide. I'm just cutting off the end again just to neaten it up a little bit. And then when I folded it into kind of quarters, I could see that, again, it was wonky on the other side as well, so I cut that bit too. So when I unfolded it, I had this kind of long, sort of even piece. So again, make sure you fold it so that the pattern you want on the outside is on the inside when you're sewing. But of course, this step could be done with a hot glue gun, or you could hand sew it, and I'm doing exactly the same thing again. I'm just feeding it through the sewing machine really carefully, stopping to line it up if necessary, and just sewing down that long line. Now, this material was a lot easier to sew. It's a lot more of a sturdy material compared to the other one that I used. So again, just pull it out, cut it, and then you are done with the sewing machine. Grab a cup of tea if you need it. So I have just sewed across the long edge of this, and now it's for the step of turning it round the right way. Now, as you can see, this one is way easier. I think it's because it's a slightly bigger one. I can get a little bit more leverage through there, and also because the material was a bit thicker, it sort of just pulled out a lot easier rather than stretching. So again, we're left with our nice little sausage of material, and we need our elastic. So I got my elastic, I've also got my safety pin, and I'm going to again measure it round the outside of my wrist, because as I said, this just seems to be a very foolproof method. Of course, leave a little bit extra just so you can tie that knot. So once you've got the right size, stick the little safety pin through the end of the elastic, and then it is ready to thread through the sausage tunnel thing. So just thread it through. Again, this was a lot easier just because I had done it slightly bigger, and you'll have the elastic, when it finally gets there, come out the other end, and you can tie the two ends together. Now again, I've gone for the kind of normal sort of double knot on the end of this because I do not want this to come apart. Now, if you are worried or you're using a different sort of more slippy type of elastic, you could put a stitch through this or potentially hot glue them together, but I'm not sure how long that would last. But it depends if you're just making a scrunchie for like one outfit for one night, or if you're planning to use these sort of in the long term. As I said, I do want to keep my scrunchies for a long time, so I'm sort of doing it in the most foolproof way. So once you have tied them together, you can either slot them into each other and leave it like that and just have a scrunchie like that, or you can finish it off properly. Now the thing with this material is because it's a cotton, it does fray, so if you are going to be doing anything, just make sure that you are tucking that underneath before you sew it, before you hot glue it, or even if you're just stuffing one end to the other, just make sure that it's folded over just so that it doesn't fray on you, because that is one of the most annoying things about this type of fabric. Again, I'm going to be sewing mine, so I'm going to sew mine from the inside out, going all the way around and making sure both sides of my fabric has been folded over just to make sure that it's avoiding any fraying. Of course, this does depend on the type of material you're using, so you're just going to have to cut the material and see what it's like when you cut it, see if it does fray. So there is another scrunchie. I really like this one. I like that it's slightly bigger, as you can see. It looks a bit silly around my wrist, but I'm really pleased with how it looks when I actually get it into my hair. It does feel slightly more sturdy than the other one. I think it's because the material is slightly thicker, but it means you can kind of position it a little bit more. So as you can see, when I put it in my hair at first, it looks a little bit like a blob, you can't really tell, but once you kind of fiddle around with it, you can sort of sort out the part you want showing at the front. So I wanted to make sure there was a moon at the front, so I just adjusted it and pulled the material a bit, and it gave it this really nice little moon on bat effect. So next up, I was using this dress I had. I got this dress from Boohoo. When I wear it, it looks horrendous, but I love the pattern. So I decided just to use one of the arms this time, because there's no point sewing a sausage when you've already got two long arms. So I chose the arm which had the most kind of ghosts and pumpkins on, and I cut the arm off. And there you go, you've kind of cut out a whole step there. I don't have to sew anything, I don't have to turn it around the right way. It's already still sorted, so I just skipped straight to the elastic part, again measuring around my wrist and cutting the bit of elastic. Now the material I'm using is very, very stretchy. Out of all the scrunchies I made, this is probably the one that came out the worst, just because the material just is so stretchy, it loses its shape so easily. But I fed the elastic through, tied a knot, and then you could again tuck it in or sew it. So I've gone for the sewing option. Again, I feel like especially if you're using a very soft fabric, you're going to need to make sure these ends are somewhat attached. Something I definitely learnt when doing this one is materials with smaller patterns are definitely better. When you've got these bigger patterns, they don't show up quite as well. But I did quite like the sort of finished effect. I just don't think you can tell exactly what it is, just because some of the pumpkins are a bit larger. Putting in my hair, it was really soft and stretchy, so it probably was the kind of nicest feeling one, but I really had to move it around in order to get this pumpkin at the front. I had to fiddle with it quite a lot, and it took a while, but once I'd kind of got the pumpkin in the right place, obviously it stayed there. I think it looked effective, I just don't think it was the best material to use. So next up I tried a scarf. Now I got a couple of these scarves during the Halloween season, and I know that they were from a dollar store, they were sent over to me from America, but these are quite sheer, so I made sure I cut off the label just because I felt like you'd be able to see the label through it, and I just followed the same process. I cut the scarf in half just because it was a bit too long, and then I folded it in half with the kind of pattern I wanted on the outside and the inside, and I was left again with the kind of cloth sausage. I turned it around the right way, and it was a lot easier because this material is very soft. And then I threaded the elastic through, just completely the same method, even though this is a thinner material, and you have the elastic either end. And I tied it in a knot. Now I'd say maybe choose an elastic that you can't really see, just because I chose a white elastic and this is slightly see-through, you can see it a lot easier. So if you can, maybe get your hand on an orange elastic, or maybe dye the elastic, it may look a bit nicer. But overall I was pleased with the effect. It was nice and soft, and when I was sewing it I did have to be careful, just because again this is the sort of material that will fray. You can see it has a slightly different effect when you put it in your hair. It looks almost more like a ribbon, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, it just isn't quite as like scrunched, if that makes sense. Again, I think this material worked nice just because it had a quite bold pattern. So I'm going to do the same thing with another scarf and also a tea towel, so I'll use exactly the same process for both of these. So cutting them, sewing them, tying them around the right way and putting the elastic through. So I was really pleased with the way that the scarf one came out. Again, it was another one of these sheer fabrics, but I do like the fact that there's a few more colours in this and it shows up really nicely. I hardly have to fiddle with this one at all in order to get a nice pattern at the front, and it sits in there really nicely. It's very lightweight material. The only thing is it is quite thin, so I did stab my nail through the material a few times, so I have to be careful in order to avoid doing that. But I do have to say this is probably one of my other favourite ones just because of the pattern that's on the material. I think it works really nice as a scrunchie. And then the tea towel one, again, this one, I really like the pattern, but the material has no stretch to it at all. As I said, it is a tea towel, so it is like a thicker cloth, but I guess this is perfect if you want to kind of create really kind of high ponytails that will stay in place. And also I've realised it would go well if you had your hair in a bun, just because it is very sturdy and it will keep your hair in place. So those are the scrunchies which I made. As you see, I made 6 different ones out of various different fabrics, and they all have pros and cons, but I'm so pleased with how they turned out. They really effectively kind of stay in place, and as you can see, you could use them just on their own, or like I did with my ponytail, I was using them with like a separate kind of hairband with them. So if you guys do end up making any of these spooky scrunchies yourself, please do put photos on Instagram and Facebook and tag me and let me see all the cool little designs which you're coming up with. So thank you so much for watching. If you do have any questions or comments, please do leave them down below. If it's sunny where you are, I hope you're enjoying the shade, and I'll see you next time. Bye!